Hey everyone, it's Natalie, and I just had a few quick updates before we get to the meat of the episode and all the tolerating that we do here on To All the Men I've Tolerated Before. So, I hope that you've heard that we have a Patreon, and now we have added a goal to get 25 Patreon members supporting the show. Once that happens, I have some cool perks planned out to release. Spoiler alert, one of them is a pen pal program because I love mail and I love putting stickers on envelopes. So head to the link in the show notes, head to the Patreon, and consider joining us and all the fun we could be having. Also, every Tuesday on Instagram Live at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific, we are partnering with Pop Culture Makes Me Jealous to bring you Still Comfy with Jules and Nat. It's a show where we're looking at our comfort TV shows and movies to see if they still make us feel warm and gooey on the inside. So check it out. And I can't wait to see you, whether it's on Patreon, Instagram, or in the DMs. Love you all. Thanks for being here. Hey tolerators, this is To All the Men I've Tolerated Before with Natalie Katona, the show where my guest and I chat about how the patriarchy creates an environment where women learn to go against their gut and better interests. Today, my guest is Shohreh Davoodi, who is the host of Conjuring Up Courage and the author of the newsletter, The Queer Agenda. We'll be chatting about her journey to discovering herself and her sexuality when she found the ability to trust her truth. Thanks so much for being here.
Yay. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. I think you summed it up so great during our kind of like little pre-recording chat where it's like, we just live in a society where at no point are you ever affirmed in trusting yourself if you're a woman.
Yeah, absolutely not. If you're a woman, if you have any marginalized identity, like basically if you're not a straight cishet white man,
yeah,
you aren't affirmed in trusting yourself, and you're very much taught to trust anything but yourself.
Right. So I was picturing, I was like, what are all of the times that I've been told not to trust myself? And it's frequent. I love the excuse that gets thrown out when you're like, hey, I don't believe that that was a kind way to talk to me. And instead of your partner, your boss, your parent, or the man that you're talking to, like receiving that, they instead go, I was just joking. You should be laughing.
Oh my God. I was just joking is the fucking bane of my existence when it comes to interacting with other people. A lot of times men, but not even just men. Like I've had that dynamic in my family so much too, where it's like anytime I've tried to push back against stuff that was clearly not okay, they'd be like, you just can't take a joke. You need to not take it so seriously. I'm like, that is some gaslighting shit.
Who woke up so sensitive today? Well, I guess I did.
Yeah. And it's like those kinds of phrases are so common, but like truly what they do is they teach us that our own feelings and experiences can't be trusted. It really is a form of gaslighting where we're just like, wait, my body is telling me one thing that like, this is not okay. It doesn't feel good to me. It's not appropriate. But everybody else is saying that I am crazy and that I'm wrong. And so which is it? And when you hear that you're wrong over and over and over again, of course you're going to believe that.
Well, and I think a lot of the times, besides the like, I was being funny and you're being sensitive, I was accused as a child a lot and as a grown woman that I'm just simply too dramatic about how I'm feeling.
Oh gosh, yes, the too dramatic, too high maintenance. Like these phrases are uniquely used against like women and femmes to put us back into our place and to basically, it's like this extension of the idea of like women having hysteria historically. Yes. That's all it is. It's just like another way to be like, sweet little child, let me patronize you because you are wrong.
Yes. And the partner of the like too dramatic, I think, is I had it and now I've forgotten it. But when it comes to the too dramatic, I just feel like, oh, it's the crying. Like,
Mm,
so I can only have feelings of great amount leave my body through tears. That is how the adrenaline in my body chooses to cope. Some people punch holes in walls and then we just go, oh, wow, it's so shocking because they were such a good guy and then they like punched a hole in your door. That's so weird. And it's that whole we've separated anger as like not a feeling. It's just like an event or a one-time occurrence.
hmm.
But whenever I'm sad, or I also cry when I'm angry, it's the only way adrenaline will leave my body. Well, then that's hysterical or dramatic and it becomes a qualifier of my personality.
Right. And it's so interesting because crying is literally like biologically a way that toxins leave our body. And I'm not
Mhm.
talking about toxins like in the sense of the fucking slim shakes on Instagram where they're like, drink this and all their toxins will come out. No, actually, our bodies have natural ways to detoxify. And crying is one of them. It's a way that we move things through our body. But so often, especially as women, we're told like, you can't cry, you got to keep that in, it's not appropriate, it's weak. That's what I was always told growing up,
Mhm.
is that it's really weak to cry and like you need to be strong, because I came from a family where it was like we don't talk about our emotions, we don't even acknowledge that emotions exist, and you have to stuff that down. And you can only imagine the effect that's had like as an adult trying to like have healthy communication and friendships and relationships.
And I think the in my experience, it wasn't even that like crying was making me weak or making me like something that no one wanted to talk about. It was mainly like that's inconvenient to whatever the goal of my day needs to be. Like you're
Yes.
having a crying situation and now I feel shame, guilt, anger, or literally I'm just inconvenienced because we have something that we need to do today.
Right. It's this idea of like, we need to move past whatever that is as quickly as possible because
Mhm.
it's taking time out of what we really need to do. And then we can start pulling capitalism into the mix, because that's literally what it is, right? Crying is taking away from your ability to put out work product into society. And so we shouldn't be doing that.
Did you know that the patriarchy is probably our number one enemy on Team Tolerator, but capitalism is like a close second because they're bed partners.
Yeah, they are absolutely bed partners. They are so intertwined, you can barely tell where one starts and one ends.
I guess what are some of the instances? So we've kind of talked about our family dynamics and being told like either be quiet but how did that manifest in your adult life? Like, how do you either witness women or femme presenting humans in your circle presenting this position where they're constantly going against their gut, or how have you yourself experienced that?
Yeah, so this shows up in a lot of different ways. So I can talk about it generally and then tell you about my personal experiences. But generally, in clients and the people I interact with online, like some of the biggest things that I've seen are like a lack of boundaries, for sure, is
Hmm.
such a huge one, because when you are taught not to trust yourself, then you turn to other people and other systems to get your answers. And so you feel like you can't set boundaries. Like it's not okay for you to assert yourself in any way. So people pleasing tends to be one of the biggest ways that that manifests. Is it's like, well, what I'm feeling doesn't matter. And so you're much more easily manipulated by other people and what they want from you, because it's to their advantage that you're a people pleaser and you don't have boundaries, because then they can walk all over you and they can get what they want. And sometimes people in your life are doing this like unconsciously too, like they don't
Right.
subconsciously, really, like they don't know that that's what they're doing. But it's so interesting because like I'll have clients or people I talk to who'll be like, yeah, it's so funny, when I started setting boundaries, all of a sudden like my relationships changed dramatically, and people were accusing me of like, you're this whole different person and I don't know you. And it's like, no, it's the same person, it's just not letting you walk all over them anymore like they did
Yeah.
previously.
It's so weird because I have this dichotomy that I was supposed to address yesterday in therapy, and then my therapy session got moved to Friday, which is fine. I'll just have time. I got to go to a bookstore. It's its own kind of therapy.
Oh yes.
But I have this dichotomy in my head where now I almost feel like I've overcorrected in the people pleasing codependency thing because I'm so scared of
Mhm.
falling back into old habits and patterns that it's like I sit around this house wondering if anyone loves and cares about me. And then when someone goes out of their way to show me love and care, I'm like, ooh, I don't trust that. Are you gonna stalk me? Like I like I just
Mm.
continuously make up these scenarios in my head. And I think it's a direct result of you have to learn how to trust your gut, but you've been taught how to not trust your gut. So your gut is bad, but all of a sudden it's good, but your gut is still hanging on to like all of these things that have like where people have taken your trust or your people pleasing tendencies and misused it. And it creates such a fucked up situation in your head.
Yeah, it totally does. I like to think of it a bit like a pendulum. And I've seen this happen with a lot of people where it's like you start all the way on the people pleasing side of things. And then when you finally like do a lot of unlearning and
Mhm.
deprogramming, like you fly the other direction because you're like, no, fuck that. I am not going to let that happen to me anymore, which is awesome. But like you said, it tends to be like an overcorrection at first where it can be
Yeah.
a little too harsh or you get new anxieties about that side of things. And so people often kind of like swing back and forth, each time getting a little bit closer to center before they find that balance of what works for them. And that makes sense, right? You've gone your entire life believing and living in one way. It's not going to just be easy to
No.
find that balanced part in the middle. It takes time.
Yeah. And I think we have, and again, it goes back to capitalism and productivity. We like literally think that, like, okay, I went to 2 therapy sessions, I should be cured. I went to the gym once, I'm waking up tomorrow with abs. Like, and it's
Mm-hmm.
just like healing is such a long process and it's also involved and it also takes twists and turns. And sometimes you do act like you acted when you were 15 because you happen to be in the bedroom that you lived in when you were 15 and it just comes back to you like a ghost.
Yes. Well, that's funny that you say that because one of the things that I work on with my clients is figuring out their ghosts of self doubt, which is this
Mhm.
term that I've come up with for like all of the voices that you have in your head that don't belong to you. And this is one of the biggest indicators that people are struggling with self trust is that they're actually not living according to their own internal voice so much because they can't hear it very well.
Yeah.
Instead, they have all these ghosts of self doubt in their heads. And this could be anything from like, you know, things your parents said to you when you were growing up or things that like a teacher said to you. I've had people with like a roommate in college, something, a magazine article that they read, just all these voices that you've internalized so deeply that you're living according to those. And you're like, oh, I should do this. I'm supposed to do this without actually stopping to ask, well, what the fuck do I want? Like, who am I and what do I want? Like, that's what it does when we systematically break down people's self trust is that people get into adulthood and they're like, actually don't know who I am. I don't know what I like and what I don't like. I feel like shit all the time, but I can't really figure out why my life feels out of alignment.
A really silly example is when I was in a codependent friendship with, I mean, if you're hate listening to this podcast because you are, you know who you are. But I was in this toxic codependent friendship where everyone had to do everything the same. It was a very hive mindset thing. And it made life easier because you always had someone to back you up on something or give you a
Mm-hmm.
ride or whatever. But it was also making life extremely harder because if you had to bow out of the hive mind and be like, I'm actually out of town that weekend, or I can't make 3 things work in my day, then you were like person non grata. But I remember being at a craft store with this guy who was my friend, and they had like calligraphy sets on sale. And he said, and I quote, calligraphy is bullshit. It's way too hard to learn. It is a nonsense art. And I laughed, but it created this silly like mantra in my
Mm-hmm.
head because I have terrible handwriting. So it was easy for me to believe that calligraphy is bullshit. So then when someone was cleaning out their art studio and gifted me through no ask or anything, just went, here, you should have one of these. I have like 10 and I'm getting rid of them. A calligraphy set. My mind immediately went, don't even open it. Calligraphy is bullshit and it's hard. Like, find someone else to pass that on to. You can't do calligraphy.
Isn't that so interesting how a single freaking comment can have like permanently change in your mind how you think about something or how you think about a person or an event. Like some of us are so easily swayed, again, because of just being beaten down over the
Yeah.
course of our lives, that anything anybody else tells us, we're like, yeah, that sounds right. We're going to go with that.
I feel like I'm becoming so combative in my conversations now because if I don't like immediately like stick up for my counterpoint, then it's like, okay, if I intake this information and I don't immediately come up with what my stance is on it and then communicate that stance, it'll create a rule in my head that will manifest itself 3 years from now when I'm in a job interview.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of that too is like, we feel like we have to make up our minds and like have a snap judgment on anything the minute that someone brings it up to us or asks us about it. And I always encourage people, like, make space where you can. Like, if you don't know how you feel about something, you want to take time to think about it or research it. Like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with being like, yeah, actually, I haven't thought much about that. Let me like look into that and I'll get back to you. Like, that is an okay thing to do, whether it's politics or it's about some art form or whatever it is. Like, we do not have to be pushed into just knowing something immediately in the moment.
And speaking of the ghosts that live inside our head, which is such a cool concept, and I almost want to create a giant art piece around it because it's so in line with the artist way, because she's always talking about like the outside people who
Mm-hmm.
influenced your craft or even influenced how you thought about creating your craft. Um, I feel like there are several people in several of my friends' lives and my own lives who, because they've known us while we were small or hormonal or our terrible version of ourselves, we still get convinced by those people that I still get convinced by a lot of people that I am still the selfish 15-year-old who wouldn't wake up from her nap to take up out the garbage and that I'm combative and argumentative and asleep all the time. And I was probably just depressed, honestly.
It's so frustrating when people who've known us our whole lives refuse to evolve what they think of us
Mm-hmm.
alongside of us, because I definitely experienced that with family and other people too. And then there are other people in my life who like totally knew me at like a not a great version of me, not the best version of myself, who I've, have been along for the ride, seen my evolution, and like are cool with it, are totally understand that, like, yeah, you were a different person then than you are now. And I really like this version of who you are. And I have so much respect for those people to be like, yeah, I can give you the benefit of a doubt as a human that you're always going to be growing and changing. And it just sucks when people won't give us that benefit of the doubt.
Well, the human condition isn't very convenient to capitalism because capitalism relies on us being consistently under its thumb and acting the same way every day because we're all just living on some sort of assembly line.
Ugh,
I
yeah, it's
know.
like, yeah, I could talk about that
Um,
for hours.
so you do this wonderful process of taking your clients in and kind of making them see all of the ways that they're not trusting themselves. And then you kind of like walk through how you rebuild that trust with yourself.
Mhm.
So, how has that looked like in your either with your clients, with yourself? What does it look like when you start like trusting yourself again? Because clearly I'm not there.
And that's okay
Yeah.
because it takes time. Yeah. So you had asked me to in the previous question, what my experience was with the lack of self trust. So I can
Hmm.
give a little backstory about what has taken me to the place that I am of trusting myself. And, the first thing I'll say is that growing up, I always had a very strong personality.
Yeah.
I'm a Sagittarius, I'm a fire sign, like I'm extroverted, like I just have a big personality. My mom always used to joke that like I could befriend anyone. Apparently, I was friends with the elementary school janitor. Don't remember it, but this is what she tells me. So I always had a great sense of myself. And 99% of children do, right? Like when a
Hmm.
kid is really young, they haven't had time to have these outside influences. Like they're showing you who they are. But then the world comes in and is like, hey, here's all these things that you actually need to be. We're going to put you in these boxes. And if you don't fit in them, we're going to make you feel really shitty about it. And so I had those experiences with religion. I grew up in a super religious household. I've been queer my whole life, but I didn't realize it until I was in my late 20s, because I grew up in a religious household where it was like, nope, not okay to be gay. That's a sin. Don't act on that. I grew up in the patriarchy, right? The biggest thing on this podcast that taught me that like your most important role as a woman is to like be in support of men, to be attractive to men. Your number one goal should be to like find a partner and get married and have babies and all of that. Like, just like every other woman growing up, I was fed those messages constantly. And so I fluctuated a lot back and forth between like being like, no, I know who I am, but then feeling like, okay, but I have to fit in, whether it was with my peers, like in high school, being like, well, I get made fun of when I am the person I am because it's not what people want me to be. Or if it was with my parents, being like, we're disappointed in you. Like, these are our expectations. You need to meet them. We're going to punish you if you don't. So I always was doing this back and forth thing. And this ultimately culminated in, I only dated men my entire life. I literally had no idea that I was interested in women. I married a man and I was with him for 10 years total. And towards the end of that marriage, I had the revelation that I was bi, because I finally had bisexual friends who I could like talk to about this and ask questions and be like, oh, some of my stereotype ideas of what it means to be bi are wrong. And I had allowed myself, I was like, oh, like, I actually think I am attracted to women. And I was like, if I wasn't with my husband, like, I think that I would date women. And I was like, oh, this won't change anything about my life. This was the line at the time. I was like, oh, it's fine. Like, came out to my husband, came out to my friends, came out to the world. But I was like, this won't change. But what actually happened is that it was like this Pandora's box in my brain, where as soon as like I flipped the switch of like, you are allowed to be attracted to women, it's okay, you can be queer. Suddenly I realized that, oh shit, I've never actually been attracted to men in the way that other people, heterosexual people or actual bisexual people, are attracted to men. I've actually never experienced sex the same way. I haven't experienced like romance the same way, but I didn't know, because I had this idea in my head of like what my life was supposed to look like and who I was supposed to end up with. And I just didn't deviate from that. And what's interesting is my body knew long before my brain did. So I was absolutely getting messages throughout that relationship and my marriage that like something was wrong, but I didn't have the tools to interpret what the fuck was actually wrong. And at the time I was like, well, I'm not going to leave what is like an objectively good marriage with like a wonderful, nice partner in person who's my friend without a good reason. And like my body being like, something is wrong, didn't feel like a good reason. So I, tried to blame myself, tried to blame other things, logic my way out of it, until I finally reached a point where my body was like, you are gay, bitch. You're fucking gay. And you cannot be married to a man because you're gay. And if you stay in this relationship, you will always be lacking of something in your life, and you'll never get to be your true self. And that was a fucking rough and painful experience and process. And like, I've explained this in like 2 minutes, but really this is over the course of years of like work and unpacking and therapy to get to that point. But that for me was like the biggest moment of self-trust, was to be able to take the leap and leave my marriage, blow up my entire life, like, financially and logistically and all these things that had to happen in order for me to get divorced, like give up the future that I had always thought I wanted, with the hope that I was right. Because I didn't know for sure. I'd never been with a woman. I was like, I could be fucking wrong about this, but I was just like, I'm going to make this leap. I'm going to trust myself, even though like it hurts like fucking hell to do this. And I'm grieving for everything, and hope that I'm right. Lo and behold, I was right, but it was rough.
I love the image of Pandora's box because I'm a huge mythology nerd to begin with. But how many Pandora boxes got opened up during the pandemic? Like literally, I can think of 6 in my own brain. Like I lost my faith in capitalism and the way that we do the workforce here. With the sexuality thing, what I've been coming to terms with is it's not normal to be in relationship after relationship with people. And then when those relationships end, you sit there and go, I don't even think I actually liked you. I can think of
Oof.
one male partner that I think, maybe two, but I think it's just one. One from when I was really young, and he was really important to me before we started dating. And
Mhm.
then we became almost more important, but kind of less important to one another while we were dating. And then it was over, and I could just like pick up and move on and just kind of be in these relationships where it's like, I don't really like you. I don't really like myself when I'm with you. But I think I'm just like playing the role that this is what everyone around me is doing. And I'm like, so today I was watching The Time Traveler's Wife because a friend and I are going live on Instagram every Tuesday to talk about it. And in pure television Stephen Moffat fashion, her big date to like really impress this dude is making him dinner, even though she doesn't enjoy cooking. She doesn't actually feel confident that she can do it. But what do women serve to men if
Ugh.
not sustenance to live?
Boo.
Boo. And I'm like, I just don't like this narrative that we've all been asked to play to. And at the end of the day, I don't actually know if I believe in it. But like you, when you were starting out, it's like, it's that fear of, so what if I tell all of these people this thing? Like, I don't want to date men anymore. It hasn't worked out before. I don't even like, as I think about my partners of the past, I didn't even like them. So I'm going to try something new. And we have such a fear of trying new things in this country. Like, we
Yes.
do not do it. We don't explore. We're supposed to immediately know who we are through like no sense of play. We took play out of kindergarten because it didn't serve any purpose.
Oh God, why is that so true though?
Yeah.
I think, yeah, especially in adulthood, we totally lose our sense of like wonder and curiosity and exploration when it comes to being a beginner at
Hmm.
things, because the older we get, the more used to being competent we are, right? Like
Yeah.
some of us have like careers or like things that we've just been doing for a really long time. There's less like new stuff overall. And so we hate feeling incompetent. And I think we also hate feeling like, what are other people going to think about us or say
Hmm.
about us? And so all of that combines together for us to not want to try new things unless we're instantly good at it. And y'all, like, that's not the way that things work. It is so rare to try a new thing and be instantly good at it. Like, that, if you were a prodigy, maybe, but for the rest of us, it's like you're going to try something new and you're probably going to suck at it for a while. And also, that is the best part. You know how fun it is to suck at stuff? It's great because like there's the only expectations are the ones you're putting on yourself. Because my expectation for any beginner of anything is like, of course you're not going to be good at this. It takes time and practice and patience to get good at these things. Like, I'll give you an example, which is that I've been doing aerials for the past 5 years now. So I do trapeze. I have an aerial
Yeah.
rig in my backyard. I fucking love it. And when I started, I was awkward as hell and a mess. Like, I am not a dancer. Speaking of things that people tell you and you convince yourself of, my mom told me that I was not graceful growing up. And so, like, I always had this idea in my head, like, you're not a graceful person. I am not a graceful dancer, but I
Hmm.
am graceful on the trapeze through practice and through working on it. But the other day, my girlfriend, I brought her out to the rig and like she was practicing. I let her go on my trapeze for the first time and she went on my friend's stilts for the first time. And it transported me back to like my first time going upside down, getting on an apparatus, and like just how hard it is, how much it hurts your body, like how disorienting it is. And I'm like, damn, like 5 years ago, that's where I was. And like, I'm in such a different place now. But if I hadn't fought through that initial like awkwardness period and the like, I am just sheer bad at this period, I wouldn't be here. And I'm so sad for all the people who just give things up so quickly because they have too high of expectations of like what they're supposed to be at for that. And
Yeah.
because we care so much about what other people think about us, like fuck what other people think.
Well, and usually it's people when you're younger, it's like with your mom, it's people who are in some sort of imbalanced power structure with you because they're a person who, again, is quote unquote in charge of you. When I was in school, and school is another Pandora's box that I'm over, is the way that we do the American education system. And I'm a former teacher. So when I was in school, I was a really great reader. It's how I disassociated and probably coped with my undiagnosed ADHD.
Hey, me too.
Hey. So I did really great in English classes. I did okay in math-based classes, but I didn't do what you would say excel in the American education system. So I was constantly told I was bad at math.
Me
So
too.
so when I would say things like, I want to be a veterinarian or I want to be a marine biologist. Marine biology was probably going to be real tricky because I do get seasick just by like kind of being in the water. Like we touch the water and my body goes, no, we're nauseous. Why would you do it?
Shout out to all the 90s kids who wanted to be marine biologists, because I swear to God, that was like one of 3 careers we all thought we were going to be.
I'm sure it was like Miss Frizzle or something. I'm sure they had like some show on the Magic School Bus with whales, and we were like, that one. I want to be where the whales are. But I wanted to be like a vet, a marine biologist, and all of it. And all I kept hearing from people was, you're not going to be that great at science because science takes the building blocks of math and you're not good at math. And do you know how many jobs in this damn society rely on math? And you just immediately think that you're not good at a huge chunk of the socioeconomics structure. Mm-hmm. And so I became a teacher. And what was my favorite fucking subject to teach? Math, because I could teach it like a language, which I think is important with the core curriculum. They teach math in 18 different ways. No one can understand it. And I go, if you teach math like a second language, you can kind of break it down into why it fits all of these 18 different niches. And biology, science. I loved coming up with science experiments for my kids. I was devastated when I didn't get to teach science anymore. This is Natalie Katona, host of the podcast To All the Men I've Tolerated Before. Are you a business owner that would like to start advertising on podcasts and want to work one-on-one with the podcast host to craft the perfect message for your business on an episode? Well, you're in luck. I'm a one-woman operation, and I have ad space open on future episodes of To All the Men I've Tolerated Before. If you are interested in learning more about booking an ad with our show, please email me at menI've-tolerated-before@gmail.com. Thanks, and I can't wait for our future collaborations.
That is fascinating. Yeah, I think all these things that we're like told we're bad at when we're kids, right? It's a lot of times it's just like we weren't being taught in the way that we needed to be taught it. Especially, you and I have this, we had undiagnosed ADHD, we were neurodivergent, English spoke to us more. And if someone had taken the time to shift the way that it was taught to make sense to our brains, then it's like all of a sudden we probably wouldn't have been quote unquote bad at math. Mm-hmm. But that's just not, as you said, that's not the way the American education system works. It's like, unless a teacher goes out of their way to create their own stuff. And there's wonderful, incredible teachers out there. Yeah. I absolutely had teachers who did this for me. But when people teach according to like what they're expected and they're told that they have to do it, there's not a lot of room for creativity. And kids get left behind who are like, well, I just can't understand this. And again, if we teach kids you are inherently good or bad at certain subjects, instead of this subject's going to just take a little bit more work and thought from you, like, of course kids give up on that stuff. Like, why try if you were just told, well, you're always going to be bad at it?
We talk a lot about the binary of the good and the bad person on To All the Men I've Tolerated Before, because you get to be both. Like, you get to be good at reading, but also I hate reading Stephen King, even though he's spooky. I think he's really drawn out. Neil Gaiman too. I love Neil Gaiman's stories when I watch them, but reading them is the biggest chore of my life because I'm like, why do we have 15 pages about this one plot of land? Was it green? Was it hot out? Was it like, this could have been 3 sentences? Like, So I'm a great reader, but there are authors I don't click with. I was really great at algebra because algebra is kind of like, I like variables. They're like puzzles. It was clean cut. I sucked at trig because my brain doesn't like to try and imagine shapes. I've always had terrible spatial awareness. And I think and it's the same with the way that religion plays into our ideas about sexuality, or society plays into our ideas about sexuality. It's either you're in group A or you're in group B. And we know that group B has prejudice attached to it. So you probably want to
Mhm.
be in group A.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we do not, this is changing, I should say. I think
Yes.
this, our generation that's raising kids is doing this very differently overall. But with our parents' generation and raising kids, and like the generation above that raising kids, it's like you didn't talk about anything related to sexuality. Like I didn't even need to hear the word heterosexual or straight because the concepts were just normalized. This is what compulsory heterosexuality is. It's that we all grow up in this cis heteronormative society
Hmm.
where we're told like you fit into this box. We're mostly going to ignore people in the other box. We're not going to tell you, hey, did you know that like there's more than just boys and girls, and that like boys can love boys and girls can love girls and you could be non-binary. Like none of that shit was ever given to me as a possibility or as an option, because that's just not how we do things as a society. Like we expect that people are going to do this thing. And it's interesting for me too. I've talked about this with my girlfriend. So my girlfriend knew that she was gay like at 4 years old. Like she
Hmm.
knew that she was attracted to other girls. And she also grew up in a really religious household where she was told it was bad. But interestingly, she is a soft butch. And so she leans more towards the masculine side, and she always has. And I think folks who are butchier
Hmm.
tend to have an easier time like knowing like I am different and I don't fit in, because they also don't show up with the gender expression that people expect them to have in
Yeah.
society, right? Like I don't want to wear dresses, I want to play with the boys, I want to do these things. And so they're told, no, you got to course correct on that. Those of us who are more femme, who are naturally more feminine, more femme, like we are more likely to go under the radar of not realizing our sexuality until later, which it can go both ways. Of course, I'm not saying that
Hmm.
this happens to only femme people, but like in my experience as a femme person, because I fit into that part of the box, like I was a feminine person, like there was no indication to anybody that I might be gay, like to try and correct that. So it was just like, of course you like boys, and of course you're going to date boys, and like this is your future because this is who you are. So I
Yeah.
think that's one of the many things that obscured my sexuality to me, is that like I fit into enough of the box
Hmm.
that I didn't think, and nobody else in my life thought that, okay, well maybe you're not all the way there.
Yeah. Well, it's like when the algorithm on TikTok, the opener, the box cutter of every Pandora's box that I had during the pandemic, when
Lesbian
the
thirst traps on
yeah,
TikTok.
when I would get bi or lesbian TikToks or whatever, I'd be like, all right, all right. When I get ADHD TikToks, I'd be like, and then everything becomes a checklist in your head. And at some point, you like weigh out. And I think this is a direct correlation to the way that we're treated in our society. It's almost like every time I do the checklist, I'm like, do I have enough checks to actually justify
Mm.
dating women or people who aren't men? Because I didn't at 4 years old have a crush on one of my girlfriends from the neighborhood or anything like that. There's so much like internalized misogyny, internalized heteronormative rhetoric or whatever, that even when you're trying to deprogram from it, you stop and you go, do I have a right to deprogram from this? Like, do I have access and even the ability to take part in this community that at 33, I'm thinking maybe I'll try it?
Oh, 100%. I am so glad that you mentioned this, because especially working with queer clients, I see this all the time. It is that like imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you have been taught that you can't trust your body. So of course you're not going to trust that maybe this thing about you could be true, because it doesn't fit into the very specific narrative that we've been given for these different things. So for queerness, for example, there is a very specific, like, born this way narrative that the queer community has kind of bolstered and put to the forefront. And it's a very helpful marketing narrative, because if we are born this way, right, then it is much easier to convince people, like, of course we can't change. Like, we were born this way. This is who we are. So that's why we deserve rights and we deserve the laws in our favor and to be able to get married and all this stuff. And a lot of people resonate with that narrative, the born this way narrative. And it's not that I don't resonate with it, because I do believe that I have always been queer. It's just that I didn't realize it very early because of all of this other stuff. And that piece doesn't fit into the narrative. I have had people in my own community argue with me and be like, you can't not know that you're gay. You always knew, you were just like refusing to acknowledge it. And like, that is not something that I resonate with. That's not true for me. And for a lot of people, they experience their sexuality as fluid, where, you know, they think that they're one thing and then it kind of shifts over time. And so there's a lot of different possible narratives and experiences that a person can have. And it's not just this one. And also, let me just throw this out there. There is nothing wrong with exploring and getting curious and trying to figure it out, right? You're not a bad person for being like, I think that I might be queer. I'm not 100% sure. I'm still exploring this, and being like, I think I want to, you know, try dating women and see how that is for me. Or I want to try dating non-binary people and see how that is for me. Or I think I might be neurodivergent. Let me see if I shift some things in my life that might work better with my, what I think is a neurodivergent brain, and see how that feels for me. There's nothing wrong with trying stuff out. Like, and you can declare that you're doing that, right? That's totally fine to be like, I think I'm this and I'm going to come out as this. And you can also do this under the radar without talking to people about it if you prefer. And you can change. I came out as bisexual first, and then 2 years later came out as a lesbian. Like, it is okay for our labels to change, for our identities to change, because as humans, we are always growing and evolving over time, as we've already said. So sometimes we get new language that we didn't have before, that all of a sudden it makes sense, or we have a new experience that all of a sudden it makes sense. Like right now, I identify as a cis lesbian woman. I can't tell you what that's going to be 10 years from now, because the world's going to keep changing. Language is going to keep changing. Maybe other things will make sense then. Maybe by then, like, we'll just have gotten rid of labels altogether and people won't be using it.
That's so back to your pendulum metaphor. That's where I think we're at on the pendulum. Like we had like all the way over to the side, we had like straight people are the best, just be straight. And then there are like two other options for you to not be straight, but you really want to be straight. And then we swung and we're like, everything has a label now. So everything can be labeled and called something, and you fit into a couple of different boxes or many boxes or this one box. And I think eventually the middle is just interacting with people the way that you want to in a loving way and not calling it anything.
Right. And a lot of Gen Zers are already going in that direction, where they are just like, yeah, I'm queer. Like, I love who I love. I am who I am. And I don't want to put a label on it. I don't feel like there's a need for it. And, you know, then there's like the millennial generation, which I'm in, where for me, because I had to fight so hard to figure out who I was, I actually really like having a label. I like having the label of lesbian. I like having the label of queer, because it also helps me find my community and find people who have had similar experiences to me. So I think there's like some for labels, there's some against labels, and like we just need to let people do what feels best for them. But I think you're totally right. Like, obviously the long-term goal is that like queerness is so normalized in society that one, we don't just assume that everybody is straight. We just assume that we actually can't know a person's sexuality or gender unless they tell us. And we assume that, hey, it could be anything, you know, until I know, it could be anything. And like all people should be treated the same and respected the same regardless.
Yeah, because you always have the right to not be attracted to someone in your dating pool.
Of
Like
course.
even when you are a queer person, if another queer person approaches you, it's not like it's an automatic yes. We've both synced up and been in our circle. So if a queer person approaches another person who they assume is queer, you're always allowed to hear rejection and experience it.
It's hilarious to me though that like the straights don't seem to get this. You know, it's
Mm-mm.
like the argument they always make about like, oh, well, if someone comes out, like we don't want them in the locker room with the girls anymore. And it's like, you are fucking flattering yourself if you think that like all lesbians are attracted to all other women. I have taste, okay?
Right.
Like I'm still only attracted to the people I'm attracted to. It's not like all of a sudden I'm attracted to everybody. Are you, as a straight person, a straight woman, attracted to every single man you're around?
Right.
Of course you're fucking not. So why would you try to put that on queer people?
It's like when the straights try to set up their one queer friend with their other queer friend, and they're like, easy.
Like, you'll get along great. It's like, do we have anything in common other than the fact that we're both gay? No? Okay. All
Yeah.
righty then.
And I think one of the things that I'm also so, and then you have to navigate these very tough situations with people that you love. And one of the things that really triggers my imposter syndrome, because I asked a member of my, like a person that I love and the person that I trust the most in the queer community, I asked, can I be traumatized into being bisexual? And is that still valid? And he goes, well, are you attracted to women? And I go, I'm letting you know that I'm trying to figure this out. And I'm trying to figure out, is this a response because I'm exploring all of my relationships with men? And that means that it's invalid? Or is it something that's always been going on in the back of my mind? And it's now just coming to the surface as I reflect. And then for it is valid. And he goes, I don't know how to answer this question. I was like, cool. But my friends, when I say, like, when I'm like, I'm just going to change up the way that I date and I'm going to be open to more gender expressions, they're like, well, is this just a response into you just not liking the men that you've dated? And I'm like, well, maybe, I don't know. But, and at the end of the day, I always go, does it matter?
I mean, yeah, like that it's a tricky thing, I think, when you're trying to figure out like which is it. In terms of does it matter? I mean, I think the only place where that could be an issue is obviously you're going to run into people in the dating pool who are going to be only interested in dating people who are sure one way or the other,
Mhm.
because of course it's not an uncommon phenomenon for straight or straight-ish people to be like, I kind of experiment with queer people and just see what happens. And there are plenty of queer people who are like, I am down for that. I'm happy to sleep and date with anyone who's trying this. Like I don't have a problem with that. And then there are other queer people who are like, I have been burned by this in the
Mhm.
past. And so this doesn't feel like a comfortable space for me. So that's like the piece where I'd say where it matters is just like in your communications with people that you're interested in dating. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with you going and trying this out and figuring it out, because I think that like, yes, like the reality is like if it were just like a traumatization, right, and you aren't actually attracted and interested in people of other genders, you're going to figure that out really quick.
Right.
Like you're going to try it and be like, nope, this actually isn't for me. I am not feeling like the attraction sexually, romantically, whatever, that I thought that I might, and I clearly have some other issue that I need to deal with men, or I'm on the ace spectrum, or like whatever other
Mhm.
possibilities, that you could discover from that. But maybe what's going to happen is you're going to try it and be like, oh, I fucking love not dating men. It is so fun to date women and non-binary and trans people. Like this is a much better fit for me. But you can't know until you try it. So it's
Right.
just like you have to go out and try it and just be honest with people that like this is new for you and you don't know yet, and that's okay.
And I think our third enemy onto all the men I've tolerated before, the media. The media only likes to write stories about one piece of that pie where it's someone's experimenting and then neither community wants them because
Yes.
it creates drama for the person who's trying to experiment, and then that's great television. So I think we're also indoctrined with this narrative where it's like, if you experiment and then you get it wrong, then no one actually wants you around because you've offended both parties.
Which is bullshit. It's
Right.
absolutely bullshit. Like we all have a right to explore and figure things out for ourselves as long as we do it in a way that is respectful of the other people that are a part of it. And I think that's just like the number one thing, like just be respectful, be honest, don't lie about like your intentions or what's going on with you. And it'll be fine. You'll find the right people. Like I said, some people are going to be like, that's not for me. And that's their right. And other people are going to be like, I'm fine with this. I think you're hot. Let's go for it.
And what I'm hoping, like back to when I was a kid, I wasn't presented a whole lot of different scenarios that I could be living my life under. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of the pushback to all of this awareness that's going on in our country is why is it such a big deal now? Why does it matter? Who cares if I have books in my classroom with two moms or two dads? And it's like, well, it does matter because some child is sitting there blocking themselves off to a lot of possibilities that they don't think are possible because they can't conceptualize it unless they're seeing and living it.
I absolutely think that lack of representation was a huge part of my own inability to, discover my queerness, because to the extent that we even got queer representation when I was growing up, it was almost exclusively white gay men.
Mm-hmm.
When we think about like show like Queer Eye, the original, when we think about, Will and Grace, like the representations of like lesbians or women who are interested in each other, like bisexual people didn't even exist. Like those representations were not really around. And not only just like in fictional media, but then also in the stories that we were getting, right? Like I didn't have much queerness in any of the books that I was reading when I was growing up. And like I said, I was a voracious reader.
Right.
Like I read literally thousands of books as a kid. And I can think of like two that had any queer rep in them. And that is bananas, because I was reading like adult books too from a very young age. So like now this is changing so much. And then, there's this pushback, right? And the country being like, we can't talk about this. Don't say gay in the classroom. We take these books out of here. Like we don't want to be woke, blah, blah, blah. And it's bullshit, because like so many kids will grow up being able to be themselves if they can see that. And it's the little stuff too. Like I think about how you were a teacher, like every example on a test or in a workbook, if it involved like a couple or a family, was like a heterosexual family structure, heterosexual couple. It wasn't like ever a queer representation of those families.
Well, and then as an adult teacher in a room full of children, you are expected to be like a sexless Barbie. Like you're not allowed to have parts. So if a child comes up to you and is experiencing anything on the sexuality gender spectrum, you've been taught as a teacher to not bridge those consequences because what if the school gets sued? So it's also one of those things where children are in a lot of environments where they have no one to talk to about this because someone feels some sort of shame down the line.
Right. And the thing that's so ridiculous about this is that, right, you're like, teachers were expected to be sexless Barbie. Sure. But also, I knew which of my teachers were married. They had pictures of their spouses in their straight relationships and other things of that nature that indicated to me that they were like heterosexual. And so we only apply this stigma to like queer teachers and to children who want to talk about queerness when it comes to like straight relationships. Well, that's what we learned about in sex ed, right? I certainly didn't learn about any queer possibilities in sex ed. I mean, I grew up in Texas, so I also only had abstinence only education, but yes, everything I learned about was in reference to assuming that you were straight and just completely ignored other possibilities. So it's like the standard is different, and that's what's fucked up.
Yes. And now there's pushback against sensitivity training. And it's like, well, I've always been a kind person. Why do I have to go through sensitivity training? Well, because at some point, someone has been unkind, or they're just trying to give you tools where you can communicate what's necessary. And I'm getting so much pushback from people in my lives where it's like, why would I be discussing this with a child at all? I go, because kids will just walk up to you and say shit to you. Like, I'm not saying that you plan to have your morning lesson be about this, but a kid will just like raise their hand and then say shit to you. And then you have to be an adult who knows how to navigate that.
And being kind doesn't mean that you don't have unconscious bias, because we
Mhm.
all do, because we all grew up with these systems of oppression being normalized. So you may think that like you are being kind and nice and like you're always going to do the right thing. But the reality is that you grew up with those same messages that we all did. And subconsciously, like this has been infiltrated in your brain, and you don't know what you might say unless someone tells you, hey, like this is actually not how we would respond in this situation. This is going to bolster white supremacy. This is going to bolster homophobia. Like, you think you know that, but you don't, because having privilege means you've never actually had to see it.
Right. And a lot of us who are now adults holding down jobs or teaching jobs or any job where you're interacting with people, we grew up in the era where gay was a real fun joke to call people. Like the
Yes.
Hillary Duff commercial is going around again, where Hillary Duff's like, it's not cool to use gay as an insult. Feminist icon Hillary Duff.
I
There was
remember
not
the
one queer
commercial.
character on Lizzie McGuire, but feminist icon.
Oh God, I love that commercial. And I remember when gay was like the cool negative
Mhm.
term. Like I remember my brothers just running around the house yelling it. Also, obviously, when I was growing up, the F slur was
Yes.
like regularly used to belittle boys and men. And like that was just normal. I think Kate McKinnon like referenced it in the like skit on SNL that she did
Yeah.
about the don't say gay thing, where she was just like, oh yeah, like we all say gay, it's whatever. And they're like, no, you can't say gay.
I love Kate McKinnon.
Me too.
We have two traditions on To All the Men I've Tolerated Before, where we kind of take our biggest takeaway of having to live through this slice of the misogyny and the patriarchy that we live through every day. And we say, this was my greatest growth moment, or this was the biggest thing that I learned about myself, or this is the biggest thing that I learned about what I can carry into the universe. And then we manifest some positivity into the communities that are also grappling with this. So, what would you say is your biggest takeaway through your journey of trusting yourself?
I would say that my biggest takeaway is that my body is my teammate
Hmm.
and my friend, and that my body can be trusted. And it is my job to keep open the lines of communication, to interpret what my body is saying, and to really put her first and listen to what she has to say to me. And that she's like my number one. If it's okay for me to like go to outside sources and research and get help from other people, but at the end of the day, like the answers that I need are inside of me. And if I am willing to turn inward, to get quiet, and to actually listen to her, she will give me what I need. And that has been just a huge turning point for me, to realize that like I don't have to live according to shoulds, according to what other people tell me I'm supposed to show up, and that actually I am my most joyful and I am my most balanced and centered if I am doing what I want. Fuck what everybody else says. And there is some privilege in that. I want to say there is safety for many people
Hmm.
that has to be considered, whether it's with family or employment or their environment. Like the world does not make it easy to say, fuck everybody else.
Right.
And so if you're like, well, I definitely can't do that, or there are spaces where I can't do that, I think the most important thing is to find places and community where you can have that full expression of you, because you need to have it somewhere. You have to have that outlet. And it sucks that you can't have it 100% of the time in all spaces. I can't even have it 100% of the time in all spaces. And I have a lot of privilege. And so finding those areas where we can be our fullest self and we can trust ourselves is really the key.
Yeah, I love that because it gives a whole new definition to body positivity
Mm-hmm.
because it's rebuilding that. So often we just have to rebuild the way that we feel about our body and the way that it physically looks to the outside world,
Mm-hmm.
but also rebuilding that relationship with how your body is feeling is also body positivity in practice.
It is, absolutely.
Yeah. I think my biggest takeaway as I approach and continue to walk through trusting myself is it's okay to flop. And the biggest thing that I need to do is trust myself when I experiment or try something new or have a moment where I didn't do like my therapist justice or something. And know that the biggest trust that I can have with myself is I'm going to trust myself to get myself through the flop.
And the flops usually teach us more than the like getting it right. In
Yeah.
my life, every time that I have flopped in some way, failed in some way, I have learned the most from that. And so we're too mean to the flop. The flop is
Yeah.
valuable.
The flop is valuable. That's a sticker. The flop is valuable, and it's just like a belly flop image. Like,
Yes.
what would be your hope and manifestation for the collective community as we move forward?
My hope and manifestation for the collective is that we get to live in a world where we all are given the space to figure out who we are in each moment because it's constantly changing, to be able to explore that, embrace that, and be that, and still be respected and loved and cared for who we are in all of our changing versions.
That's beautiful. It's it's like the world peace answer of like sexuality. It's like I just want to live where everyone's okay to be okay.
And to not be okay,
And
because
to
that's
not
okay
be okay.
too.
I think my greatest manifestation is if the pendulum is going to keep swinging, and that's fine. We've gone through a lot of pendulum swings in our day. Eventually, I get to live in that middle center where instead of everyone feeling the need to be in a box, we just have enough representation out there of all of the different paths that life, sexuality, careers can take. So everyone gets this landscape of, oh, we're kind of chill with everything. So I actually do get to be the captain of my life ship.
Yeah, and it's like it's not a stagnant center. It's like the living, breathing center where
Hmm.
it's like there's lots of space to move around and like there's lots of possibilities. I think, especially when it comes to healing work or things like body positivity or sexuality, there's this narrative of like, we're working our way up the mountain and we're
Yeah.
going to reach the top and we're going to be like, hooray, we're here. And we're just going to stay there forever. And that's like not reality,
Um,
right? There's constantly going to be movement and things and going up and down. So it's more for me, it's become about accepting like the process and being excited about the changes and the possibilities and knowing that like maybe there isn't like some peak of healing or some peak of
mhm.
body positivity, and it's actually just like being able to take things in stride
Yeah.
and being able to like feel better in ourselves and know that we can navigate the ups and downs and trust that we can do that.
Wouldn't it be great if I could take disappointment or shame and not immediately feel clammy and uncomfortable and like my body is shutting down? Like sometimes
Mm-hmm.
shame feels like death. And I feel like that
It
also
does.
is a byproduct of misogyny and capitalism.
Facts. Facts.
Sheree, this has been a great conversation. It's been such a healing hour for me. Thank you so much for joining us on Team Tolerator. And please know that you get to come back any and every
Yay.
time you're pissed at misogyny. There are a million topics that we could be covering, and we just covered a couple of them today. So it's an open door policy here on To All the Men I've Tolerated Before. Let everyone know where they can find you and all of the great messages that you have for everyone.
Of course. Well, thank you so much for having me. This was super fun. I'm glad we got to do this.
Yeah.
I am pretty easy to find if you spell my name correctly because I am Shohreh Davoodi everywhere. So my two biggest platforms where I spend the most time are Instagram and TikTok. My name is spelled ShohrehDavoodi. I know you'll have it in the show notes and
Oh,
in the title and everything too if y'all are trying to look it up. So find me there. My website is shohrehdavoodi.com. I have a newsletter called The Queer Agenda, as you mentioned, where I send out self-trust tips and wisdom most weeks. It's really fun space. Highly recommend signing up for that at shohrehdavoodi.com/subscribe. And if you want to work with me, I am a self-trust coach. I work mostly with queer people, but I also work with many allies as well. And I do one-on-one coaching. And I also have an awesome year-long membership program called Follow Your Arrow. If it's not enrolling actively at the time when this podcast comes out, there is a interest list on my website you can sign up for to be one of the first people to know when it does drop. And you also mentioned I have a podcast, Conjuring Up Courage, comes out bi-weekly. There are over 130 episodes so far, so there's plenty of shit for you to scroll through and find what you like and listen to and get caught up.
Well, thank you so much. And tolerators, you know the deal. There's a link tree in the show notes. It'll show you all of the places where you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, Patreon, all of it. It's a fun little handy little link. And remember, tolerators, you don't have to smile through anything you're tolerating, including walking through life with this really icky feeling inside of yourself because you've never been given the tools to trust yourself. Smiles are for joy. Hey everyone, it's Natalie, and I'm just here real quick to tell you that To All the Men I've Tolerated Before officially has merchandise. So if you're looking for a really great way to support the show and get our name out there so everyone can be on Team Tolerator, consider following the link in our show notes or in the bio of our Instagram at Men I've Tolerated Pod so you can buy one of our title tees or see some of our holiday lines like our feminist spooky line that includes t-shirts like Misogyny is Monstrous or My Past Relationships Still Haunt Me with a beautiful haunted house on it. Happy spooky season, have a great day, and go shopping and treat yourself. You deserve it.